And we're starting things off with Jeronique Cunningham and Cleveland Jackson. On January 3rd of 2002, Jeronique Cunningham and his half-brother Cleveland Jackson committed a violent crime in Lima, Ohio. They took the lives of 3-year-old Jala Grant and 17-year-old Lanisha Williams. The victims, along with 6 others, were present at the house of a man targeted by Cunningham and Jackson for a robbery involving drugs and money. Following the robbery, Cunningham and Jackson opened fire on everyone inside the house. Tragically, Jala died while her father held her in his arms. Cunningham and Jackson also attempted to take the lives of the survivors, each of whom sustained gunshot injuries during the incident. Both Cunningham and Jackson were convicted, with Jackson receiving a death sentence. Cunningham is currently serving a life sentence. Next on the list is George Wagner IV. In April of 2016 in Pike County, Ohio, a gruesome incident took place, now known as the Pike County Massacre. 8 members of the Rodin family were tragically taken from life in 4 separate homes. The victims included 7 adults and a 16-year-old, all shot to death. In November of 2018, authorities arrested George Wagner III, his wife Angela Wagner, and their 2 sons, George Wagner IV and Edward Wagner Jr. in connection with the crimes. The family was accused of meticulously planning and executing these attacks. Their motive was believed to be centered around child custody, financial disputes, and an illegal marijuana growing operation. Next up, we have Michael Madison. So Michael Madison, born in Cleveland, Ohio in 1977, was convicted in 2016 for the deaths of 3 young women in East Cleveland, Ohio. Between 2012 and 2013, he took the lives of his victims, whose remains were discovered in various locations near his residence. Madison's arrest in 2013 followed the discovery of the first victim's body wrapped in plastic in a garage. Neighbors had noticed a foul odor coming from his property, and authorities were alerted. Their investigations continued, and this led to the identification of 2 additional victims. Police found the remains of the second victim in a weeded lot, and the third victim's body was found in a nearby abandoned house in the basement. During his trial, Madison actually smirked, causing a father of one of the victims to lunge at him in anger. Luckily, that man was released without charges. Madison was found guilty of multiple charges, including aggravated murder and kidnapping. In 2016, he was sentenced to death for his crimes. Next up on the list is Donald Hoffman. Donald Hoffman was convicted of taking the lives of 4 men over the Labor Day weekend in 2015. He was sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms. The victims, Freeland Hensley, 67, Gerald Smith, 65, Billy Jack Chapman, 55, and Daryl Lewis, 65, were residents of Bucharest, Ohio. Hoffman admitted to his crimes, stating he committed the acts to fund his drug addiction. And during the slayings, Hoffman used various methods of violence. He beat Hensley with a frying pan, strangled Smith with an electrical cord, struck Smith in the head with a bottle, strangled Lewis with shoelaces, and attacked Chapman with a pry bar. Hoffman stole the victim's debit and credit cards, spending over $2,100 on drugs and cigarettes. Prosecutor revealed that Hoffman specifically targeted older men with health issues whom he knew personally. Number 6, the Downtown Posse. During the Christmas season of 1992, the Downtown Posse, led by Marvelous Keene, embarked on a brutal crime spree in Dayton, Ohio. The first victim was Joseph Wilkerson, a 34-year-old General Motors worker. The gang lured their way into his home where Wilkinson was shot. The gang then partied in his house for the next 3 days while he lay dead in a bedroom. On the same night, they took the life of 18-year-old Danita Golette, who was using a payphone. She was robbed of her belongings and lost her life despite pleading not to be harmed and cooperating as best as she could with them. The following day, the body of 19-year-old Richard Maddox, a former boyfriend of one of the gang members, was discovered. Jeffrey Wright was also shot but survived his attack, having received multiple wounds. Continuing their violent spree, the gang shot Sarah Abraham, 8-year-old mother working in a family business. Abraham succumbed to her injuries 5 days later. On December 26th, former Dayton Police Sergeant John Huber spotted a stolen car connected to the group. He arrested them, not yet aware of their involvement in everything else that had been going on. After their arrest, Laura Taylor, one of the members of the downtown posse, confessed to 2 more victims, the bodies of Wendy Cottrill and Marvin Washington, who were found in a gravel pit. Taylor revealed they took them out because the gang believed they might inform the police about their crimes. Marvelous Keene, the gang's leader, confessed and was sentenced to death, with his sentence being carried out back in 2009. The other 3 members received life prison sentences. Next on the list is Edward Edwards, which is just the dumbest name I've ever heard. Just laziness on his parents' behalf, but that's all this guy really deserved. Born in 1933, Edwards' criminal activities started at a young age with burglaries and frauds. He was arrested multiple times over the years for various offenses, including arson, robbery. In 1961, he was convicted of arson and spent several years in prison. After being released, though, Edwards took the lives of several people, including his own adopted son. He took the lives of 2 different couples in the 70s, and in 1992 he ended the life of his adoptive son, Donnie Boy Edwards, committing the crime for financial gain in order to collect his $250,000 life insurance policy. Edwards' crimes went undetected for many years, allowing him to continue his criminal activities, but in 2009 he was finally apprehended and charged with crimes he committed decades earlier. He was linked to the crimes through advancements in forensic technology and DNA evidence. Ariel Castro. Castro was born in Puerto Rico, but he moved to Cleveland, Ohio with his mother when he was young, and this is where he would grow up to commit his crimes. Castro was responsible for the abduction and imprisonment of 3 women, Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina De Jesus. These 3 women were held captive in Castro's home for about 10 years. That is crazy. One of the victims, Amanda Berry, even gave birth to her daughter during this time. They were subjected to physical and emotional torment, which included being kept in restraints, confined to a few rooms in the house. Amanda Berry managed to escape from Castro's home in May of 2013, though. Castro had left the home for the day, and she managed to catch a glimpse of his neighbors through a screen door. She screamed for help and managed to make contact with them. All 3 women were luckily rescued, as well as Berry's daughter. Castro was arrested shortly after the escape. In 2013, he was charged with multiple counts. To avoid the possibility of facing the death penalty, he later pleaded guilty to the charges, and in August 2013, Castro was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and, just because why not, he got an additional 1,000 years in prison. So yeah, safe to say he's not getting released anytime soon. Next up, we have TJ Lane. So many have heard of this case. This guy became pretty infamous for his conduct in the courtroom, where he showed absolutely 0 remorse or regret for his actions, taunting the victims' families, giving the middle finger to everyone in the courtroom, and pretty astonishing, really. TJ Lane was convicted for a school shooting at Chardon High School in Ohio on February 27th of 2012. He opened fire in the school cafeteria, resulting in the deaths of 3 students and injuries to 3 others, one of which became permanently paralyzed. Lane was arrested the same day and later found guilty of multiple charges. In 2013, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Lane actually did manage to escape from prison in 2014 along with 2 other inmates. They'd used a makeshift ladder to scale a fence during recreational hours. Luckily though, he was found later that night. He's now serving in a maximum security prison, the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility. Next up, we have Robert Berdella. Now, this guy died in 1992, so a return is highly unlikely, but he's got to be one of the worst criminals in Ohio's history, right up there with Dahmer, possibly even worse. He was born in Ohio in 1949, but his crimes were carried out in Kansas City between 1984 and 87. He was responsible for the deaths of at least 6 men. Berdella lured his victims, often vulnerable young men, to his home with promise of money or shelter, and once in his captivity, he subjected them to prolonged periods of sadistic torment. He would hold them in captivity, sometimes for as long as 6 weeks at a time, before disposing of them. His crime spree came to an end in 1988, though, when one of his victims managed to escape and alert the police. The bodies of his former victims were never found, unfortunately, but police did find journals and Bordello had written chronicling his crimes, as well as photographs and personal belongings of the victims. Bordello was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He died in prison in 1992 due to a heart attack. Finally, we have Sean Great, eventually being sentenced to death for his crimes, having taken the life of 5 young women. His last victim, whose real name has been kept secret, known to the public simply as Jane Doe, had met Great at the Ashland Salvation Army Ray and Joan Kroc Corps Community Center. She viewed their relationship as purely platonic and would consistently reject his advances, but Great managed to lure her to his home using the ruse of offering her some clothes he claimed to have for her. Once inside though, his personality completely flipped and he attacked her. She ended up being held captive for 3 whole days. But there's a light at the end of this tunnel. She managed to find an opportunity to secretly contact the police while Great was asleep. This led to his arrest and the end of her nightmare. And during the legal proceedings that followed, Great was found guilty of his crimes. He's currently sitting on death row. With all that said, I've been your host, James. I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.
Coming in at number 10 is Nikolai Yezhov. Nikolai Yezhov was a Soviet secret police officer including at the height of the Great Purge. He organized mass arrests, tormented, and executions, but then he fell from Stalin's good graces. He was arrested and subsequently admitting in a confession to a range of anti-Soviet activity, including unfounded arrests during the Purge. He was executed in 1940 along with others who were blamed for the Purge. Now Nikolai wasn't only ousted, executed, and disgraced along with his family, he was then methodically erased from photographs where he had previously appeared with his commander. Overnight, Nikolai went from one of the highest officers in a powerful New World Order to a shadow in a poorly lit photo and a name no one dared to utter. Now, Nikolai wasn't the only person to receive this Photoshop treatment, as it was common in the communist government to deny failures and make inconvenient truths, even people, disappear. Now, the practice has continued in current communist-led governments where rebellious leaders are removed by force and deleted from official documents. Coming in at number 9 is Delphine LaLaurie. Delphine LaLaurie was a sadistic serial slayer socialite who lived in New Orleans. On April 10, 1834, a fire broke out in her mansion's kitchen and firefighters found a 70-year-old black woman chained to the stove. Now, she appeared to have started the fire in order to attract outside attention while Delphine was trying to save her furniture. Now, the authorities were led by other slaves to the attic and they were shocked. Disfigured and maimed slaves were chained to the walls or floors. Several had been subjects to medical experiments, most likely performed by her husband, who was a doctor. One man appeared to be part of some bizarre change. A woman was trapped in a small cage with her limbs broken and reset to look like a crab, and another woman with arms and legs removed and patches of her flesh sliced off in a circular motion to resemble a caterpillar. There were claims that an elderly man had his face so beaten it was indistinguishable, and one woman had her back wounded to the point where her bones were visible. Some had their mouths sewn shut and starved to death, others had their hands sewn to different body parts, and most were found dead, and the remaining that were alive were begging to die to be released from the unbearable pain. Now, LaLaurie and her husband fled by boat before she could be brought to justice, leaving the butler, who also participated, to face the wrath of a mob that had gathered outside. Number 8. Zhang Qing. Zhang Qing was a Chinese communist revolutionary, actress, and major political figure during the Cultural Revolution. She was the 4th wife of Mao Zedong, the chairman of the Communist Party and paramount leader of China. Now, Zhang was best known for playing a major role in the Cultural Revolution and forming the radical political alliance known as the Gang of Four. Through clever maneuvering, she managed to reach the highest position of power within the Communist Party, just short of being president. It is believed that she was the main driving force behind China's Cultural Revolution, of which she was the deputy director. Now, during the Cultural Revolution, much economic activity was halted, and countless ancient buildings, artifacts, antiques, books, and paintings were destroyed by Red Guards. Millions of people in China reportedly had their human rights annulled during this time, and millions more were also forcibly displaced. Estimates of the death toll of civilians and Red Guards from various Western and Eastern sources are about 500,000 in the true years of chaos of 1966 to 1969, but some estimate as high as 3 million deaths, with 36 million being prosecuted. Number 7. Jang Song-taek. Jang Song-taek was the uncle of the current dictator of North Korea, Kim Jong-un. He was more focused on following in the ways of his brother, Kim Jong-il, something that the new dictator didn't agree with. Now, at the beginning of his rule, Kim Jong-un was still considered quite young for his political position, and some of his choices were questionable at best. Seeing that his uncle didn't agree with him, he had him tried by a special military tribunal and executed by a firing squad. Now, after his execution, Kim ordered all media outlets within North Korea to remove any sort of record of him, and that included any sort of pictures or information from history books. Number 6. Peter Burnett. Peter Burnett was an American politician who served as the first elected governor of California from December 20th, 1849 to January 9th, 1851. Now, in 1848, he moved to California during the height of the California Gold Rush. He was appointed to serve on the Supreme Court of California, and even though he had enslaved 2 people, to make California a slave state, instead pushing for a total exclusion of African Americans in California. Governor Peter signed into the law the so-called Act for the Government and Protection of Indians, which enabled the enslavement of native Californians and contributed to their genocide. He declared in an 1851 speech that a war of extermination will continue to be waged between the races until the Indian race becomes extinct must be expected. While we cannot anticipate the results, but with painful regret, the inevitable destiny of the race is beyond the power and wisdom of man to avert. Now, efforts by federal negotiators to preserve some native land rights were fought by the administration of Peter, who favored the elimination of California's indigenous peoples. Now, he also passed the Foreign Miners Act, which taxed only Chinese and Mexicans, deliberately designed to drive them out of the gold fields. Now, a wave of violence against them took place before and after. Number 5. H.H. Holmes. H.H. Holmes was a con artist who liked to take the lives of people. Until his execution in 1896, he chose a career of crime, including insurance fraud, 3 to 4 illegal marriages, horse theft, and ending the lives of many. He claimed to have ended the lives of 27 people before he was arrested, tried, and executed. He constructed a hotel of horrors, later known as the Murder Castle, to target guests visiting the Windy City during the 1893 World Fair. Now, the building was equipped with soundproof rooms and had gas lines that could be used to asphyxiate guests. It also had trap doors and a secret series of tunnels that Holmes could use to spirit away their bodies, which he was believed to have dissected and sold. Now, in the basement were a dissecting table, stretching rack, and industrial oven. On May 7th, 1896, Holmes was executed, and in 2017, amid allegations that Holmes had in fact escaped execution, his body was exhumed for testing. Due to his coffin being contained in cement, his body was found not to have decomposed normally. His clothes were almost perfectly preserved, and his mustache was found to be intact. Now, his body was positively identified by his teeth as being that of Holmes, and he was then reburied. Number 4. Ante Pavelic. Ante Pavelic was a Croatian politician who founded and headed the fascist ultranationalist organization known as the Ustashi in 1929 and served as a dictator of the independent state of Croatia, also known as the NDH. Ante and the Ustashi prosecuted many racial minorities and political opponents in the NDH during the war, including Serbians, Jewish and Roma people, and anti-fascists, becoming one of the key figures side of Serbians. At the behest of the German senior Ustaše Slavo Kosmic declared the NDH's establishment on April 10, 1941 in the name of Ante. Ante then returned from Italy and took control of the puppet government. He created a political system similar to that of fascist Italy and Germany. After taking control, Ante imposed largely anti-Serbian and anti-Semitic policies that resulted in the deaths of over 100,000 Serbians and Jewish people in concentration and extermination camps in the NDH, which resulted in the torment and deaths of several 100,000 Serbians, along with tens of thousands of Roma and Jewish people. Now, following the surrender of Germany in May 1945, he fled, and ironically, on April 10, 1957, a Serbian hotel owner attempted to end his life by shooting him. Now, initially surviving, the resulting injuries would lead to his death on December 28, 1959. Number 3. General Yahya Khan. General Yahya Khan was a Pakistani military officer who served as the 3rd president of Pakistan from 1969 to 1971. Now, he also served as the commander-in-chief of the Pakistan Army from 1966 to 1971. Now, along with Tika Khan, he is considered the chief architect of the 1971 Bangladesh genocide. Yahya Khan's presidency oversaw marital law by suspending the constitution in 1969. Holding the country's first general election in 1970, he delayed the power of transition, and in March 1971, Khan ordered Operation Searchlight in an effort to suppress Bengali nationalism. This led to the Bangladesh Liberation War in March 1971. Now, Khan was central to the perpetration of Bangladesh genocide, in which around 300,000 to 3 million Bengalis died, and between 200,000 to 400,000 women were taken advantage of. In December 1971, Pakistan carried out preemptive strikes against the Bengali allied Indian Army, culminating the start of the Third Indian-Pakistan War. Now, the wars resulted in the surrender of Pakistan, and East Pakistan seceded as Bangladesh. After Pakistan's surrender, Khan resigned from the military command and transferred the presidency. Khan's short regime is regarded as the leading cause of the breakup of Pakistan. He is viewed negatively in both Bangladesh, being considered the chief architect of genocide, and in Pakistan. Number 2. Pol Pot. Pol Pot was a Cambodian revolutionary, dictator, and politician who ruled Cambodia as the Prime Minister of Democrat Kampuchea between 1976 and 1979. He was a leading member of Cambodia's communist movement, the Khmer Rouge, from 1963 to 1997, and served as General Secretary of the Communist Party of Kampuchea from 1963 to 1981. Now, his administration converted Cambodia into a one-party communist state and perpetrated the Cambodian genocide. Pot planned to turn Cambodia into a simple, agrarian, and socialist society. He forced the urban population, such as teachers, doctors, and other professionals, into the countryside, onto collective farms, and executed anyone who complained or broke rules by a pickaxe. There was more than 150 detention centers for any dissidents. S-21, the most notorious one, had 7 survivors out of 20,000. Others were taken to fields, executed, and buried in mass graves. Now, he also outlawed religion, most reading, money, anything private, and strictly governed sexual relations, vocabulary, and clothing. Out of a country of not even 10 million people, it's estimated up to 3 million people died in just 3 years. Number 1. Queen Ravaloa. Queen Ravaloa was known as the Mad Queen of Madagascar, and I feel like that explains a lot. She finally ascended to the throne on August 4th, 1829, where she immediately took out all her rivals. She had expelled the European merchants, teachers, diplomats, and trade deals with Britain and France were immediately cancelled. After one successful battle against an invasion, she slit the heads of Europeans, stuck them on pikes, and lined them in the beaches. Now, she also banned the teachings of Christianity, and she had many evil techniques to punish people, as her descendants and criminals would be dumped slowly in boiling water or oil, or tied down with ropes and burned alive. She would place others into coffins, and some were buried into holes with dirt showered upon them. She sold her subjects into slavery to boost her country's economy, which involved brutal labor conditions, staying far away from homes, and malnutrition-related deaths. Now, these people were either considered traitors, victims of war, non-taxpayers, or Christians who secretly practiced their religion. Her reign brought down the nation's population from 5 million to 2.5 million at the end of her rule. Starting off this countdown, we have Elizabeth Wettlaufer.
I've done this, and I'm ready to face it, but I would love to.
Elizabeth Wettlaufer was a Canadian registered nurse for 9 years in southwestern Ontario. In 2016, she quit her nursing job, checked herself into a psychiatric hospital, and confessed to her crimes. Apparently, between 2007 to 2016, she used her powers as a nurse to take the lives of 8 of her patients, and injured 6 others. She would do so by giving them lethal doses of insulin. She also admitted to stealing opioids to fuel her personal addiction. After she confessed to the killings, an interview took place with the police, and that's when she confessed her crimes once again, this time in a detailed statement. Apparently, she had voices in her head telling her to kill those patients.
Part of me had started to believe that it was the devil, and part of me thought it might be God as a purpose through my life.
At first, she believed that this was God talking to her, so she felt okay killing for him. Then later on, she thought maybe it was the devil. On top of that, she claimed that it was a gut instinct telling her that these people needed to be killed. And once she did the deed, she would hear laughter in her chest.
Whatever it wasn't a voice in my head, it was a voice in here. And when I would do it, afterwards I would hear like a laughter in my head.
She was sentenced to 8 concurrent life sentences with no chance of parole for 25 years. In our 9th spot, we have Robert Durst. Robert Durst is an American convicted murderer and possible serial killer. It all started in 1982 with the disappearance of his wife, Kathy Durst. Obviously, he was the main suspect. Then in 2000, he murdered one of his friends, Susan Berman, and in 2001, he killed his neighbor. And just this year, he was finally convicted for killing his wife. During his interviews and interrogations, he maintained his innocence, claiming that he never did it. But after one of his final interviews, he made a grave mistake. He went to the bathroom and didn't realize that his mic was still on. While in the bathroom, he was talking to himself and basically confessed to the killings.
There it is. You're caught. What the hell did I do? Kill them all. Of course.
The interviewers were completely shocked by what they heard, and Robert was immediately arrested. In our 8th spot, we have Daniel Wozniak. Daniel Wozniak is a former community theater actor who in May of 2010 took the lives of 2 people. During that time, he was struggling financially. He was in debt and unemployed. Then when he heard that his friend Sam Herr had $62,000 from combat pay, he decided to kill Sam in order to steal his money. Then he ended up killing a woman named Julie Kabushi, a 23-year-old college student who was tutoring Sam. His plan was to make it seem like Sam killed Julie and then went on the run. But in the end, he was caught. This video is from the police interrogation of Daniel. Here's him putting the blame on Sam.
Opened the door, it was Sam. Alright. I'm like, hey man, what's going on? Everything good? And he's like, not good, we're in trouble. We need to get the out of here. And so he drove, he's like, there's a dead body in my apartment. He said he'd been doing some heavy drugs. He's like, I shot somebody. I was not happy about it. It was a fit of rage, and honestly, she had it coming. I said she.
But of course the police weren't buying his story. It was all too convenient.
Where's the gun, Sam? What did you do with the gun?
I'm not Sam, my name's Dan.
I know, but that's what you were, wasn't that what you were asking him?
No, I have nothing to do with this because my life was in danger with my wife. I'm sorry.
How was your life in danger?
He threatened it.
The 2 interrogators could see through Daniel's act. In fact, they said it was as if he was putting on a theater show for them. In the end, Daniel did confess, but figured he might try and act insane in order to get off with lesser charges.
Money and insanity.
Money and insanity. Okay.
In our 7th spot, we have patient number 18. Now, this has got to be one of the creepiest and mysterious clips on the internet. It's an interview featuring a man named Patient 18. This interview is filmed at a psychiatric hospital, and this man is there because he has schizophrenia. This tape is actually what schools use to teach their students about schizophrenia and the mind. But it's mysterious because we don't know much about this dude. Now, I just want to say, having schizophrenia or mental health issues does not make this guy an evil person. He's on today's list because apparently at the hospital he admitted to taking someone's life. Plus, he has a history of criminal behavior. Upon doing more research, this might be a man named Stephen E. Anyways, take a look at this interview.
And what happened that ended up with your being here in the hospital?
The psychiatrist decided that this was the situation for me.
Did he tell you why?
No, the psychiatrist did not.
Has anybody told you why?
No.
I got chills. I don't know about you. It's quite interesting how he carefully plans out his answers. Plus, no matter what they're talking about, he still shows no emotion.
And in what way are you different?
I am trying to do with my life something which few people try to do. And this influences my thinking and consequently my actions.
He may seem calm on the outside, but what you can't imagine is everything that's going on in his head. You can tell he's trying hard to stay in control.
As soon as I express the belief that I do not belong in this hospital, which is a mental hospital, then those who dislike me want to find a worse place for me.
In our sixth spot, we have Alonzo Perez. In 2016, Alonzo Perez was charged for a series of crimes, including robbery with use of a deadly weapon, attempted murder with use of a deadly weapon, grand larceny, and battery. He was also arrested in connection with the death of Mohammed Robinson. This is footage of Alonzo inside of the interrogation cell waiting to be questioned. But not much of that actually happens, as he manages to escape. First, we see him looking around at the cameras, and then he decides to forcibly remove his handcuffs. Now, he does manage to get them off, but he's not ready to leave yet. He hasn't thought of a plan. So he pretends that his handcuffs are still on and he thinks of an escape plan. When he thinks of his plan, he gets up, climbs up, and escapes by crawling through the ceiling. He then drove away in a rental truck that someone left with the engine running. But don't worry, it was short-lived freedom, because within days he was caught again, and in more trouble. In the end though, he did plead guilty to 3 murders. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Andre Chikatilo. Andre Chikatilo, otherwise known as the Butcher of Rostov, or the Rostov Ripper, was responsible for the deaths of 56 individuals. He would lure people that he met at bus stops or train stations away to remote locations, and then he would murder them. Sometimes he would even eat certain parts of his victims. In this interview, what shocks a lot of people is the fact that everyone expects him to act like a monster, but in fact, he acts quite the opposite. He seems innocent, which is either an act or, you know, his true personality. So he keeps up the innocent act, saying how he feels sorry, blah blah blah. But the act drops when he is asked one question. Now, the interview is in Russian, but I have the translation. So the interviewer asks him if he has ever thought about meeting his victims in heaven or hell. He answers with, and I quote, "No, I have never thought about that, never. I feel like it doesn't bother me. I have never thought about it. I have already passed all rounds of hell in my life. I am already ready to pass away to the other world again." That right there is creepy, not gonna lie. In our 4th spot, we have David Berkowitz, but you probably better know him as the Son of Sam. He was a serial killer who took the lives of 6 individuals and wounded 7 others in New York City for more than a year. He would typically target good-looking young women with long brown hair. As a result, a number of women were cutting their hair short or dyeing it blonde. He was eventually known as the Son of Sam because he would leave letters near his victims' bodies, signing it off with that name. In the end, he was caught and claimed that his neighbor's dog was possessed by a demon, and that this demon dog was the one telling him to kill these people. Wild, I know. Well, years later, he did this interview. He admits to being into Satanism and how it influenced him.
Yeah. I mean, when you talk about Satan, what are you actually referring to?
Well, you know, many people may not really understand that, but there was a time I was so confused and so troubled that I was seeking meaning and purpose. I was seeking something, I don't know, as my life began to spin out of control. I mean, I got involved in like Satanism, and I was reading the Satanic Bible. And
he continues on talking about himself, but a lot of people believe he was just putting on an act the whole time, that he was trying to convince people that he's normal so that he would be released early. This is pretty common among serial killers. They love to manipulate people.
How does it feel to be here for 30 years knowing that this is going to be it?
You know, it's like, you know, the expression, take one day at a time, and it's never easy, you know, being incarcerated. I have no one to blame but myself.
In our 3rd spot, we have Michael Beaver. In July of 2015, 16-year-old Michael Beaver and his 18-year-old brother Robert took the lives of their parents and 3 siblings. They first attacked their sister. When she screamed, their mother ran out of the bedroom and they stabbed her over 50 times. Eventually, they worked their way around the house, killing their family members. It's a very scary and graphic case. In this interview, Michael completely confesses to everything to an officer.
So he was buying weapons because you guys had talked about murdering.
Yeah, and he started planning it.
Okay. And that you didn't want to do it?
I don't want to do it. I didn't, just because I didn't kill anyone.
Okay.
I stabbed someone.
Who did you stab?
My younger brother, Christopher.
Christopher? How old's Christopher?
9, I think.
What'd you stab him with?
My knife.
What's your knife look like?
There's literally no emotion in his voice, and for being so young, he doesn't seem affected by this at all. But here's the thing, this guy was obsessed with other killers, and the police officer noticed this and kept prying.
Because you mentioned a couple names of, are those like serial killers or something?
What, like Columbine?
Yeah.
Columbine and James Egan Holmes. James Egan Holmes is guy that shot at the theater.
In Colorado?
Yeah, he killed 12 and
Wow. How many were killed in Columbine?
Columbine, I don't know, like 15.
Okay.
I think.
He knew the killer's first and last names and their kill count. No one just knows that information off the top of their head, so that's creepy. In our second spot, we have the BTK killer. Between the years of 1974 to 1991, American serial killer Dennis Rader took the lives of 10 individuals. In 2005, he was convicted for his crimes and was sentenced to 175 years in solitary confinement without the possibility of parole. This video is Dennis's confession to killing Maureen Hedge.
So I very carefully snuck into the house, kind of like a cat burglar, and after checking the house, she wasn't there. So about that time, the doors rattled, so I went back to one of the bedrooms and hid back there in one of the bedrooms.
He then proceeded to talk about how he stayed in her house for hours until the next morning when he woke up and strangled her.
No, I manually strangled her when she started to scream.
So you used your hands?
Yes, sir.
And you strangled her? Did she die?
Yes.
It's chilling seeing him talk so casually about all of this. And in our number one spot today, we have Issei Sagawa.
たった指先ほどの小さな銃弾を放ったことによってさまざまな人たちを傷つけ、あるいは変えてしまう。
If you haven't heard of this case, then brace yourself because it's a very dark and gruesome one. In 1981, Issei Sagawa killed and ate a woman named Renee Hartfelt. Apparently, he always had a fantasy to eat a beautiful human. When he saw Renee, he knew she was the one. On June 11th, 1981, he invited her over, and then he shot her at the back of the neck and then ate her over the next 2 days. That's not even the worst part. The worst part is that he was never convicted of his crimes. He literally spent 2 days in jail, then was sent back to Japan, and then he became a celebrity there. He was so famous that he made a living through the public's interest in his crime. Imagine that, literally becoming wealthy for killing someone. He's guilty, he's even admitted to it, but he never got penalized. Here are some disturbing moments from an interview with him.
多分もう一晩でも食事をルネとしていたら食べる対象には考えたことはない。自分の書いたシナリオ、ずっと前からそういうシチュエーションを考えて、どっから食べる、どうやってやる、全てこう頭の中にシナリオができてた。
He continues on, going into gruesome details about his murder and about another time that he attacked a different woman. I personally had a hard time sitting still watching this. It's just way too much.
And we're starting out this list with Grigory Rasputin. Born in 1869 in a small Siberian village, he grew up as a peasant. He was also a mystic and grew up to become quite close with the Russian royal family after seemingly healed Alexei Nikolaevich, the son of Nicholas II and heir to the Russian throne. Alexei was a hemophiliac, meaning his blood didn't clot properly, and Rasputin, after being called to the palace of Nicholas and Alexandra, seemed to ease his symptoms. This was miraculous, and the royal family put their full trust in this mysterious holy man who would go on to have sleeping with any woman he could within the palace, but he was also known to force himself on women. But because Nicholas and Alexandra were so enamored with his supposed power, any concern or report about him was completely written off. It seemed that everyone on the outside wanted the guy gone though, seeing how he was pulling Nicholas and Alexandra's strings, controlling them like puppets, and there were a number of attempts to take Rasputin's life, but this guy was hard to take down. He was stabbed and recovered, poisoned with cyanide, which had no effect. He was shot and was seemingly dead before springing up like Michael Myers at the end of Halloween. He was then shot again before being wrapped up in a blanket and thrown in a river where he finally drowned. Number 9. Gilles de Rais. Born in 1404, Gilles de Rais was a French nobleman and a respected military leader, but he had a secret life. He was responsible for viciously taking the lives of countless young ones and was said to be a practitioner of black magic and conducted occult rituals, leading many to believe that he possessed otherworldly abilities. This guy was an absolute monster. If you want to talk about true evil, this is it right here. His servants, mostly young men, very young men, and other young ones around his castles, started going missing, and rumors started to spread that Gil de Rais was disposing of them, something that turned out to be true when witnesses began seeing servants disposing of bodies. Many were afraid to speak out against him, though, due to the immense gap in class that was present at the time. He was finally arrested in 1440, though, and under the threat of excruciating punishment, he admitted to his crimes, actually revealing that he would take the lives of his victims in these dark, occult-like rituals. Next on the list, we have Elizabeth Bathory. Elizabeth Bathory, born August 7th, 1560, was a Hungarian noblewoman notorious for being one of the most prolific female serial killers in history. She's often remembered as the Blood Countess because of her horrifying crimes. Bathory was accused of tormenting and taking the lives of numerous young females. Her methods included severe beatings, burning, and disfigurement. And what she's most famous for, though, was her belief that bathing in her victim's blood would preserve her youth. It's said that she may have taken the lives of hundreds in her quest for eternal beauty. Her actions eventually caught the attention of authorities. In 1610, she was arrested and her accomplices were put on trial, and the accounts from witnesses and survivors painted a very chilling picture of her cruelty. She was never officially tried in court, but was confined to a windowless room in her castle until her death in 1614. Number 7, Aleister Crowley. Crowley, born in 1875, was an English occultist and ceremonial magician, founded the religion of Thelema. He was a prominent and very controversial guy, especially at the time, known as the Great Beast 666. He was an occultist, writer, and ceremonial magician, a man of many mysteries and oddities. Crowley was known for more than just his eccentric lifestyle, though. One of the big questions surrounding him is whether he actually had any mystical powers or was just really good at talking the talk. Crowley wasn't shy about bragging that he could communicate with supernatural beings. He claimed to have a direct line to a being named Aiwass, who supposedly dictated to him the book of the law, basically the Bible of Thelema. Then there's the curious case of his rituals. Crowley was all about strange ceremonies, often involving weird symbols and chants, and even some bizarre sexual practices. As to whether he was evil, I mean, some would definitely say he was, but yeah, certainly not like most of the others on this list. Like this next guy, for example. And at number 6, Thug Behram. Thug Behram, born in 1765, became infamous as the ruthless leader of the Thuggee cult in India during the 18th and 19th centuries. The Thuggee were a secret criminal society that specialized in robbery and murder, targeting unsuspecting travelers. What made the Thuggee particularly sinister was their method of operation. They would often befriend and gain the trust of their victims on the road, only to then strangle them with a rummel, a cloth, and this kind of ritualistic fashion, allowing them to carry out their crimes discreetly. Behram was one of the most notorious Thuggee leaders, believed to have taken the lives of hundreds. He actually admitted to witnessing 931 people die right in front of him, and that's not even counting the ones he had a direct hand in. Under his leadership, the thugs terrorized India for years with a well-organized network that spanned the country. He was eventually captured and put to death in 1840. Next, we have H.H. Holmes. Holmes was born in 1861 in Gilmanton, New Hampshire. Although he was highly intelligent from a young age, he displayed all your classic disturbing signs early on. He would capture and torture animals, cutting into them and performing strange experiments. Holmes, whose real name was Herman Webster Mudgett, not quite as intimidating sounding, committed crimes that were as horrifying as they were calculated. He constructed this nightmarish castle in Chicago, specifically equipped with secret passageways and like soundproof rooms and gas chambers, which were all made to assist with his gruesome crimes. He would lure numerous victims, mostly young women, surprise, surprise, into his property, and once inside, they came face to face with unimaginable horrors, including excruciating torment, asphyxiation, and dissection. The exact number of his victims isn't 100% known, but it could be anywhere from just 9 to over 200. I'm guessing it's somewhere in between. In 1896, he was finally convicted for his crimes and sentenced to death. Number 4, Gil Garnier. Here we have a real-life werewolf case, at least the closest thing possible. Gil Garnier, aka the Hermit of Saint Benoît and the Werewolf of Dole, was a reclusive man born at some point in the mid-1500s in France. He lived in an isolated home just outside the town of Dole. His new wife moved out to the home with him, and it was at this point that something changed in Garnier. He had always hunted food for himself, but now having to provide for another person, it was difficult, and this started driving a wedge between him and his wife, and he started getting desperate. It was at this point that several young ones in the area started being found mauled to death with parts of their bodies having been eaten. Meaning this had to have been the work of some large animal, right? But it wasn't. It was Garnier. Garnier's crimes came to light when a group of traveling workers had spotted him eating the body of one of his victims in the dead of night. At first, they thought they were looking at a wolf. According to Garnier, he had been hunting one night when a ghostly figure came to him, telling him it would imbue him with the power to transform into a wolf, making it easier for him to hunt. And since that night, he had stalked and hunted a number of young people, most of which died as a result of his savage attacks. He was burnt at the stake in 1574, accused of lycanthropy and witchcraft. I don't know what it was with guys named Gilles in France back then, but they didn't like young folks, apparently. Number 3, Vlad the Impaler, the original vampire himself. If there's anyone in history that just feels like they stepped out of some portal from another dark dimension, it's this guy. Vlad was born in 1431. He was a tyrant renowned for his brutal methods of punishing enemies, often impaling them on long spikes. His reputation for cruelty gave rise to the legend that is Dracula, inspiring Bram Stoker's famous vampire novel. Alongside these gruesome acts, there are legends suggesting Vlad may have possessed otherworldly powers. Tales kind of hint at his ability to control the weather, summon dark forces, or even transform into a vampire-like creature. The line between fact and fiction often blurs with this guy. Some believe that his cruelty was more than human, that maybe he had something supernatural lurking inside him, some sort of dark entity from beyond. He just inspired this intense fear and awe in his time, and his brutality definitely unquestionable, but the idea of him being an actual vampire, most likely just legend, but fun to imagine. And at number 2, we have Jack the Ripper, a name everyone has heard before. One of the first cases of the type of modern day serial killer we hear about all the time now, only this man was never identified. Jack the Ripper terrorized the Whitechapel district of London in 1888 and remains one of the most infamous figures in criminal history. His victims were taken out in the most gruesome ways possible. They looked like they had been mauled to death by a 500-pound brown bear. Jack primarily targeted female workers of the night, brutally mutilating their bodies. The sheer level of ferocity of these attacks and the fact that he was never caught really has fueled the theories and speculations over the years about him. He taunted the police with letters that were apparently from him, signed as Jack the Ripper. There have been intensive investigations and a number of suspects that have kind of come up over the years that could have been him, but his true identity has never been definitively proven. Finally, we have Heinrich Himmler. Heinrich Himmler was a high-ranking German official during World War II. He had a deep and disturbing fascination with the occult. He believed he could summon dark forces to help him shape a new world order and tried to incorporate his beliefs into the ideology of the regime. He established a research institute to explore ancient and supernatural phenomena. Under his direction, he conducted these expeditions to search for evidence of Aryan origins, looking into topics like ancient artifacts, astrology, folklore, and this interest extended to the dark and the occult, as Himmler believed that tapping into these mystical forces would help the German forces gain more power and control. He promoted pseudo-scientific theories, obviously related to racial purity, and mysticism, and saw the SS almost as this more modern-day knightly kind of order. Such a bizarre side of the Second World War. It feels like something out of Hellboy, but this really was a thing. The German forces were really dabbling in this type of occult stuff at the time.
Starting us off in our number 10 spot is Son of Sam. While you are probably already familiar with this one, considering he is one of the most infamous killers of all time, the Son of Sam, or legally David Berkowitz, was an evil killer responsible for the death of at least 6 people in New York City during the 1970s, and who famously blamed his evil doings on his possession. Prior to his arrest, Berkowitz liked to taunt the police and would send in mocking letters with the promise of further crimes, which eventually developed into becoming highly publicized by the press. Then by 1977, he was finally arrested on account of 8 shootings. Now, initially, he confessed to all of the killings, stating he was obeying orders of a demon that manifested in his neighbor's dog, Sam, hence the name, and was sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences in state prison. Berkowitz claimed that the dog demanded the blood of pretty young girls and that the possessed Labrador issued irresistible commands. Even scarier, in 1977, after his arrest, he was permitted to write a letter to the public, in which he stated that there were other sons, seemingly meaning he was not alone in these crimes, but no one else was ever charged. Now, I have to admit, later in the 90s, after becoming an evangelical Christian, he backpedaled, saying that the devil in the dog story was all a hoax, and that he was actually a part of a satanic cult that orchestrated the incidents as ritual killings. But I mean, either way, he was a super evil dude, so I'm just glad he got caught. Next up at number 9, Tommy Smith. Peter Churm was a kind and loving father and grandfather who was tragically attacked on February 24th, 2015 when 17-year-old Tommy Smith tried to steal the keys to the old man's Range Rover. At the time of the attack, Churm attempted to stop who he believed was just some young punk. However, unbeknownst to him, Tommy had already racked up a staggering 57 offenses, and Churm was going to be his next. In the blink of an eye, Smith stabbed the old man all over his body, allegedly with so much vigor that the blade snapped in 2. However, astonishingly, Peter survived. Fast forward to the following year, and Tommy is on trial for his attack, among his other crimes. But despite the long rap sheet, Smith explained to the jury, or rather insisted, that he was not responsible for his actions, as he had been possessed by a demon on that terrible day. Now, it's hard to say if the jury really did take it into account or not. However, it was also known that Smith was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic, and so he was cleared of the killing charge and instead sent to a secure hospital indefinitely. Coming in at number 8, a Satanist group. In August of 2008, in a forest outside the city of Yaroslav, police were horrified when they came across 4 utterly corpses. The bodies had been desecrated beyond belief, but after lots of hard work, investigators were able to determine that all of the victims were boys, and that each had been robbed either before or after their death. However, after taking into consideration the brutality of the crime, they weren't convinced that robbery was the only motive. Eventually, they discovered the atrocity had been carried out by a group of 6 self-proclaimed Satanists who, after a number of animal sacrifices, felt that humans had to be killed in order to please Lucifer. So, under the possession of Satan, the group, dubbed the Yaroslav Killers, dismembered the 4 teens as a part of an initiation ritual before allegedly ingesting some of the flesh themselves. Eventually, the group faced a trial in 2010, and the leader of the group, Nikolai, was sentenced to 20 years, while the others received varying sentences ranging from 8 to 10 years behind bars. Next up at number 7, Jason Nelson. On the night of May 26, 2015, a man named Jason Nelson visited the home of his drug dealer Jordan McGuire. However, instead of their usual exchange, Nelson, out of nowhere, repeatedly stabbed the young man before fleeing off into the night. Thankfully, police were able to track him down not too long after, and it didn't take them long to discover upon interviewing him that he was also responsible for a slew of other crimes that same night, like the essay of a 25-year-old and 60-year-old, both of whom lived near the site where McGuire had been killed. However, what they didn't see coming was his excuse, that a demon had told him to do it. According to Jason, the night of the crimes, he was possessed by an evil entity who forced him to kill McGuire and commit essay on the women. However, this excuse didn't quite hold up all too well, and he still ended up being charged for the crimes, and by October of 2015, he was sentenced to life with a possibility of parole after 27 years. Next up at number 6, Cody Lott. Back in 2016, two middle schoolers, Lauren and Michaela, were walking home after school. This wasn't an unusual activity for the girls. However, this time they were approached by 20-year-old Cody Lott in his car. After making eye contact with Michaela, he pulled out his weapon and began shooting at the girls, sadly taking the life of Lauren that day. According to witnesses, he first shot Lauren, then Michaela, before returning his focus to the already shot and dying Lauren. However, the sickest part of this was what he said in his 2018 trial. Lott initially repeated that it was the devil that had helped him to plan the shooting, and he was therefore not responsible for the girl's death. However, he also mentioned that he believed that Lauren had a boyfriend and that he was jealous of that, which, I mean, is first of all incredibly gross, as let's just remember that Lauren was in middle school and that the killer was 20. However, secondly, seems a bit contradictory for someone who claimed to be possessed by a demon. Initially, Lott was found mentally unfit to stand trial and was sent to the maximum security unit of Texas Mental Hospital. But later in September of 2018, a jury found him guilty of the killing as well as the aggravated on Michaela, and so Lott, the man who claimed to have talked with the devil, was sentenced to life in prison. Coming in at number 5, Louis Zambrano. On September 18th, 2015, the body of a woman was discovered inside of an abandoned car in Queens, New York. After a bit of investigating, authorities were able to confirm that the body belonged to 28-year-old Angie Escobar, who had tragically died after being stabbed roughly 80 times 4 days prior. This, of course, sent them into an investigation to find the perpetrator, and before long, Louis Zambrano was arrested for the brutal crime. Initially, during his interrogation with authorities, Zambrano confessed to police that he had done it. Apparently, Angie was his girlfriend, and she confronted him saying that she no longer wanted to be together, and so he used a pair of scissors to get his revenge. However, it wasn't quite that simple. Next, he explained, while still pleading guilty, that he had been possessed by a demon at the time of the killing, plus he apparently also blamed his trust issues for his actions. Now, my question is, if he really was possessed at the time of the killing, why would he also be pleading guilty? I don't know. It's probably best I don't think too hard about it. In the end, this evil man was charged with manslaughter and sentenced to 20 years behind bars for his crimes, but to this day still claims that his possession was the reason behind it all. Coming in at number 4, Jason Dalton. If you have never had uber anxiety before today, this might be the story that gets it started. Back in 2016, Jason Dalton appeared to be your average Uber driver. However, he had a dark secret. He was inexplicably killing a bunch of people. The day was February 20th, 2016, and he shot and killed 62-year-old Mary Louie Nye and her sister-in-law, 60-year-old Joe Nye, 74-year-old Dorothy Brown, 68-year-old Barbara Hawthorne, and 53-year-old Richard Smith and his 17-year-old son Tyler. But the most bone-chilling part was that in between these killings, he continued to pick up and drop off passengers at their preferred destinations. Now, out of all of the possessions I've heard about, Dalton's story is easily the wildest, as he told police during his interrogation that it was the actual Uber app that had taken over his mind. Quote, "I know you guys are gonna have a hard time believing this, but it literally took over my mind and body." He then elaborated, saying that he saw, quote, "the symbol of the Eastern Star inside the Uber app, and a horned devil head regularly appeared on his phone screen whenever he logged on for work." After a 3-year-long trial, Dalton was sentenced to life in prison, but even so, he stood firmly by his statement that a demon living in the Uber app possessed him to randomly kill 7 people. Coming in at number 3, Arne Johnson. In the early 1980s, the Glatzel family and Arne Johnson made headlines after Arne, seemingly out of nowhere, was not only charged for killing his landlord, but was the first man in the US to claim demonic possession as the reason for his innocence against the charges he was facing. However, to explain his 1981 charges, we have to go back a little. Prior to the infamous trial, the youngest member of the Glatzel family, David Glatzel, began seeing visions of what he described was a man with big black eyes, a thin face with animal features, jagged teeth, pointed ears, horns, and hooves. Soon after, David was believed to be possessed by an evil demon living inside their home. Eventually, after things began getting worse, the family enlisted the help of the famed duo Ed and Lorraine Warren, hoping that they could drive the demon out of the boy. Now, Arne Johnson was the fiance of David's older sister Debbie, and allegedly during the final exorcism on David, Arne stormed in and told the demon to leave the boy alone and come into him. And according to Arne, that is exactly what happened. A few months later, he got into an argument with his landlord, who he had previously had a good standing relationship with, and stabbed him multiple times. In the end, he was convicted for his crimes, but never wavered that the devil had made him do it. Coming in at number 2, Michael Taylor. Back in 1974, a beloved and cheerful family man without any previous criminal history seemed to suddenly change overnight into a different person. The previously non-religious man joined a local church and quickly became entangled with a 21-year-old preacher, Marie Robinson, who convinced her congregation that the power of God could drive out their demons. However, strangely, the more he became involved with Robinson and the church, the more he changed. The once kind and patient man was turning irritated and foul-mouthed, and it all came to a head when he and the preacher were found naked together. This kind of behavior was so out of character for Michael that the church decided to exorcise him, believing he was possessed. They strapped him down and allegedly exorcised a whopping 40 demons from his body, but it would turn out that that wasn't enough, as still 3 demons remained inside him. That night, Michael brutally killed and dismembered his wife and dog, and upon being arrested, told police that he was possessed by Satan, who had compelled him to destroy everything living within his house. Deemed unfit for trial, Taylor was ultimately found not guilty by reason of insanity and sent to a psychiatric facility to live out the rest of his life. And last up in our number 1 spot, Sean Sellers. In his early years, Sean had a very difficult life. His upbringing was a mixture of unreliable and abusive alcoholic parents, mixed with incredibly cruel psychological torture from nearly every adult in his life. And tragically, this pattern of abuse eventually led to a giant explosion that resulted in multiple deaths. On the evening of March 5th, 1986, while wearing nothing but his underwear, Sean crept into his parents' room, them in their sleep, and took both their lives. However, this wasn't his first offense. It was later discovered that a year prior, he killed a Circle K employee who had refused to sell him beer. Now, the haunting part about this whole case is that Sean claims to have no recollection of the killings. He did, however, make it very clear that prior to killing his parents, he had taken part in an occult ritual and that he was a practicing Satanist, clarifying that at the time of each offense, he was under demonic possession of the demon Ezerate, and that he was not responsible for the crimes committed. Not only that, but similarly to the case of Arn Johnson, his defense attorney used this story and even blamed Dungeons and Dragons, claiming that it had made him unable to connect his actions to real-world consequences. The story, however, did not sway the jury, and Sean became the youngest criminal sentenced to death in America since 1976.
Number 10. Peter Kürten. Peter Kürten was a German man known as the Vampire of Dusseldorf who took the lives and took advantage of many people between February and November 1929. The first death he definitely committed occurred on May 25th, 1913. During the course of a burglary, he encountered a girl named Christine Klein asleep in her bed. Peter strangled her, then slashed her twice across the throat with a pocket knife. Now this made him excited down there, if you know what I mean, due to him hearing the dripping from her wounds onto the floor by her bed and on his hand. He then did this multiple times to countless other victims. Then one day Peter confessed to his wife that he was the Vampire of Dusseldorf, and in the information provided to detectives, his wife explained that although she had known her husband had been repeatedly imprisoned in the past, she was unaware of his culpability in any deaths. He was arrested and was charged with 9 counts of homicide and 7 of attempted homicide. Now he pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity to each of those charges, but he was found guilty and sentenced to death on 9 counts. Now he was also found guilty of 7 counts of attempted homicide. Now Peter displayed no emotion as his sentence was passed, and at 6 o'clock on the morning of July 2nd, 1931, Peter was beheaded via guillotine. Since he loved blood, his last words were, "Tell me, after my head has been chopped off, will I still be able to hear at the sound of my own flashing from the stump of my neck? That would be a pleasure to end all pleasures." Now that is just disgusting and ew. Number 9. Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan was the founder and first Khagan of the Mongol Empire, which later became the largest adjoining land empire in history. Having spent the majority of his life uniting the Mongol tribes, he launched a series of military campaigns which conquered large parts of China and Central Asia. In the 13th century, he ended the lives of so many peasants that carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere were significantly reduced as a result. Now during his 21-year reign, his destructive armies were responsible for the deaths of up to 40 million people. He died in August of 1227, but his death was kept a closely guarded secret. Now according to legend, Genghis Khan's last words were, "I have conquered for you a large empire, but my life was too short to take the whole world. That I leave you." Now whether he uttered those short sentences or not, his successors were more than happy to take up the challenge. Number 8. Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer ended the lives of many young men in Milwaukee, where he would then dismember them. It has been reported that he ended the lives of 17 males between 1978 and 1991. A detailed search of his apartment revealed 4 severed heads in his kitchen. A total of 7 skulls, some painted, some bleached, were found in his bedroom and inside a closet. Investigators discovered collected blood drippings upon a tray in the bottom of Jeffrey's refrigerator, plus 2 human hearts and a portion of an arm muscle. In his freezer, investigators discovered an entire torso, plus a bag of human organs and flesh stuck to the ice at the bottom. Elsewhere in the apartment, investigators discovered 2 entire skeletons, a pair of severed hands, 2 severed and preserved male sex organs, a mummified scalp, and in a 57-gallon drum, 3 further dismembered torsos dissolving in an acid solution. A total of 74 Polaroid pictures detailing the dismemberment of his victims were also found, which is just disgusting. Although he was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and a psychotic disorder, he was found to be legally sane at his trial. He was convicted of 16 counts of ending someone's life and was to serve 16 terms of life imprisonment on February 17, 1992. Then on November 28, 1994, he was beaten to death by Christopher Scarver, a fellow inmate. His last words were, "Christ Jesus came to the world to save all sinners, of whom I am the worst." Number 7. Eileen Wuornos. Eileen Wuornos was an American serial slayer and prostitute who operated in Florida. In 1989 to 1990, while engaging in street prostitution along highways, she shot and robbed 7 of her male clients. Now, she claimed that her clients had either taken advantage of or tried to take advantage of her, and that all the deaths were committed in self-defense. Eileen was sentenced to death for 6 of the deaths, and on October 9, 2002, after 12 years on Florida's death row, she was executed by lethal injection. Her last words were, "I'd just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock and I'll be back like Independence Day, with Jesus, June 6th. Like the movie, big mothership and all, I'll be back." Now, that's incredibly unsettling, and I do not like that she said that at all. Number 6. Charles Manson. Charles Manson was a criminal who created a cult called the Manson family. It was active in California in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Now, the group consisted of approximately 100 followers who lived an unconventional lifestyle and frequently used psychoactive substances. Now, according to group member Susan Atkins, the members of the family became convinced that Manson was a manifestation of Jesus Christ. Now, some of the members committed a series of 9 deaths at 4 locations in July and August of 1969. In 1971, Manson was convicted of first-degree homicide and conspiracy to commit homicide for the deaths of 7 people, including the film actress Sharon Tate. The prosecution contended that while Manson never directly ordered the deaths, his ideology constituted an overt act of conspiracy. Now, on March 4th, 1971, during sentencing hearings, Manson trimmed his beard to a fork and shaved his head, telling the media, "I am the devil, and the devil always has a bald head." Then on March 29th, 1971, the jury sentenced him to death. Manson, though, died from cardiac arrest resulting from respiratory failure brought on by colon cancer at a hospital on November 19th, 2017. His last words were, "I'm the most famous human being not only that is alive, but the most famous human being that has ever lived." Yeah, you can tell he still had a big ego even while looking into the eyes of death. Number 5. Salvador Ramos. You may not know this man's name, but you do know his crime. On May 24th, 2022, Salvador Ramos and his 66-year-old grandmother had an argument over his failure to graduate from high school, during which he shot her in the face before taking her black 2008 Ford F-150. Ramos, using his Facebook account, sent 3 private messages to a girl from Germany whom he had met online. The first said that he was going to shoot his grandmother, the second said that he had shot his grandmother, and a third, about 15 minutes before the said that he was going to open fire at an elementary school. He went to Robb Elementary School, his former school, and fatally 19 students and 2 teachers, while 17 others were injured but survived. Now, details are still fuzzy about what happened, as it took the police forever to get into the building to take Salvador down, but what I could gather is he was in a room and opened the door and said goodnight before officers. In return, the officers back, ending his life. Number 4. Richard Ramirez. Richard Ramirez, dubbed the Night Stalker, had a highly publicized home invasion and life-ending spree that terrorized the residents of the greater Los Angeles area and later the San Francisco Bay Area over the course of 14 months. Richard cultivated a strong interest in Satanism and the occult and would often commit burglaries to support his addiction, many of which were later frequently accompanied by ending people's lives and taking advantage of them. Now, he also frequently enjoyed degrading and humiliating his victims, especially those who survived his attacks or whom he explicitly decided to live by forcing them to profess that they loved Satan or telling them to swear on Satan. Now, he was eventually caught, and in 1989 he was convicted of 13 counts of taking someone's life, 5 attempts of taking someone's life, 11 counts of taking advantage of a person, and 14 burglaries. He was sentenced to death and was on death row. While awaiting his scheduled death, he died on June 7th, 2013 due to health complications, but his last words were, "I am beyond good and evil, I will be avenged." All I gotta say is, I hope he doesn't get avenged. Number 3. Albert Fish. Albert Fish ended the lives of many of the young and was suspected in at least 5 homicides. He was nicknamed the Boogeyman for his predatory behavior. He confessed to 3 deaths that police were able to trace to a known homicide, and he confessed to stabbing at least 2 other people. Now, Albert once boasted that his number of victims was about 100. He abducted Grace Budd in 1928, and in an abandoned home in Westchester County, New York, he ended her life and devoured her body. He wrote a letter to Grace's mother telling her about the crimes he committed against her daughter. He said, "When all was ready, I went to the window and called her. Then I hid in a closet until she was in the room. When she saw me all naked, she began to cry and tried to run downstairs. I grabbed her and she said she would tell her mama. How did she kick, bite, and scratch? I then cut her into small pieces so I could take my meat to my rooms, cook, and eat it." Now, this is extremely disturbing, and I cannot imagine how her mother felt, and as a result, he was executed on January 16th, 1936 in the electric chair, and his last words were reportedly, "I don't even know why I'm here." Which again is disturbing, because did he really think he didn't deserve to die after the horrible crimes he committed? Number 2, Carl Panzram. Carl Panzram was a serial slayer, arsonist, burglar, and someone who took advantage of men. In prison confessions and in his autobiography, he confessed to having committed 21 deaths, only 5 of which could be corroborated. He's suspected of ending the lives of more than 100 men in the United States alone, and several more in Portuguese Angola. He also confessed to having committed more than 1,000 acts of taking advantage of men. His last words were, "In my lifetime, I have murdered 22 human beings. I have committed thousands of burglaries, robberies, larcenies, arsons, and last but not least, I've committed sodomy on more than 1,000 male human beings. For all these things, I am not the least bit sorry." Now again, that's just plain disturbing, as he had no remorse at all. And coming at number 1 is Jake Berg. In 1949, Jake Berg, sometimes referred to as the Tacoma Axe Killer, was arrested by police after breaking into the home of Bertha Klutt and her daughter Beverly June Klutt and ending their lives with an axe. Upon questioning by authorities, Jake revealed intimate knowledge of 33 other deaths of Caucasian women, which made him a prime suspect for those as well. On July 15, 1949, Jake was hanged at the Washington State Penitentiary, but not before he uttered what would be later known as the Bird Hex in his final statement. He said, "I'm putting the Jake Bird Hex on all of you who had anything to do with my being punished. Mark my words, you will die before I do." Now, the real scary thing about this is that within a year of his execution, 6 people connected to this case did die. So, is it a curse? Was it a coincidence? Who knows?